You have an idea. You want to tell it to the world, but you don't know where to start. That's where Anchor comes in. They have the tools for you to edit, produce, and record your idea right from your phone or computer. It's the easiest way to reach and grow your audience. They publish for you to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms. And to top it all off, they match you with advertisers so you can earn from your passion and your wonderful idea. So tell me, what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started and follow your dream.
Welcome to Disruptive Adventism. My name is Jose Briones, and I'll be your host for this podcast. This podcast is about discussing the polemical statements and practices that are part of the Adventist fabric, which in turn shape this belief system to be unique and relevant for today's society. Welcome back, everyone, to Disruptive Adventism. Today, we are starting our series on youth culture, so we really hope that you enjoy it. I have one of our great co-hosts here with me, and Caitlin. Caitlin is here, and we're going to be discussing the topic of youth culture and kind of introducing you to some of the interviews and things that you'll be hearing for the next couple of weeks. As you may notice, and from the previous episodes that we have been playing, the mics are a little bit different. So, Caitlin, how do you like the mics?
Ooh, the mics are great, and as you can probably tell, we sound pretty fantastic right now, don't you think, Jose?
I think so. I really think so. I think that the mics that we got were really good. It's kind of like easier to edit as well. There's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes for you guys, and we just really appreciate the support that you guys have been giving us.
Yeah.
I mean, without our Patreons, it will be impossible to have this quality, so we really appreciate all of those who have been contributing.
Yeah, huge shout out to you guys. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's been really helpful. And for those of you, again, who know what Patreon is a GoFundMe pretty much monthly, and you can start at $1 a month. But we'll leave the advertisement out of the picture right now and continue with our youth culture topic. So, Caitlin, how's it been for the past couple of weeks?
Oh, it's been busy. Holidays have been really great, but I am still in my graduate studies program, so this means it's end of semester time and all the papers, all the finals, everything. So
yes,
it's nice and busy.
I think it's great. Like the end of the semester, like that kind of life just comes back. You get a break and you just get to relax and listen to the podcast, of course.
Of course. Get caught up if you haven't listened to everything so far.
That's right. We have been releasing, and we have had some awesome interviews with some awesome people, and we have some awesome interviews coming up. But let's get into our topic 2 minutes in. This is a good time frame now. Let's talk about youth culture, within Adventism and outside of Adventism as well. So what would you say is youth culture as a whole?
Well, first off, right off the bat, I got to say teenagers are my favorite demographic. No joke. Teenagers are amazing people. And so I'm stoked to be talking about youth culture today because youth are amazing. I think that the young adult youth sort of age that you're questioning a lot of really big identity questions, a lot of introspective, existential sort of questions and concepts you're beginning to really delve into. You're moving past your childhood where you just regurgitate what's been told to you or just quote back the things that you've heard, and you're really starting to wrestle with ideas. And so to me, when I hear the phrase youth culture, I think of people who are trying to find themselves, who are trying to find life answers. And, sometimes youth get a bad rap for how they go about doing that. But honestly, I think I see so much Jesus in youth, just as they're trying to navigate life and figure out what this world is all about. That's God's heart calling out to them, and it's so cool to see them in this search.
Yes, and I think to add to your point, one really interesting idea that you kind of brought along is that you see a lot of Jesus, in youth, and I think that's very positive, because most of the time we are not seeing that. We are not pointing towards the positives that youth are doing, the projects or the things that they're involved in. Because I think we forget that we have been there and that we kind of matured away from that let's say, quote unquote, mentality that we used to have. So I really think that it's all about how we navigate through the world. And youth culture just encompasses, like, from the beginning of your adolescence all the way until you become an adult. So I think that's, a part of like who you are. And like, I think everyone can reminisce to their youth days and just think about, oh man, like, I learned a lot. I went through a lot. I matured. I kind of like started developing certain traits of my personality. And I think that that's, what we're kind of going to be seeing in the interviews that are coming up. Because, it's mainly about like, what is youth culture and how do we relate to it like today? Now, when I think of Adventism in particular, and one interview that we're going to be having is Pathfinders. That's part of the youth culture of Adventism from, I think, 10, right?
Something like that.
Even before,
yeah.
Right? Like Adventurers or something like that.
And I feel like there's one even before Adventurers
Yeah,
sometimes.
it's like Little Lambs or something like that. Yeah. We talk about it with Eric and one of the upcoming podcasts. And, I think that's kind of like a central idea, I think, that has been perpetuated in the past. But I think it's morphing, like youth culture and Adventism is shifting a lot, especially because of the social media revolution. I think that, I can think of young adults, right? They don't identify with those things anymore. I don't think the Pathfinder appeal is there for many young adults. But I think certain elements of it are still there. Like, we still regard discipline. We still regard the positive traits, or maybe like, when you go into adulthood, you don't call it Pathfinders or camping anymore. Like, you kind of go through the transition of, oh, I want to, be in the wilderness and like just connect with nature or whatever, like, and you go in hammock, like, or it kind of morphs. Like, I think every age that you kind of go through, you kind of deem certain things not cool anymore or not as important.
I think that you're totally right, that things morph along the way as you get older, as you engage in different activities, as maybe you learn more things. Maybe I don't want to be part of this huge troop of people out camping in the woods together, but maybe I really like backpacking and I just want to go with my buddy and head out into the woods and backpack. There's still that connection with nature that you experience. Or maybe I just really like learning and there's all these honors, all these things that I learned when I was in Pathfinders, and I want to continue my pursuit of getting more skills and getting more knowledge.
Yeah, I think that those areas are kind of like determined for all of us. Like, I think we start learning in different methods, but I also think that, Pathfinders is one area, it's like, that's not the whole of youth culture. Like there's music, there is just like the way that people relate to the world in the sense of like speaking truth to power. Like, that's part of like being young. Like, it's just like, being young means kind of like rebelling, but I don't want to take it into a bad way either. Like, it's not just about like, oh, rebel, terrible. Like, they don't follow the norms, quote unquote. But I think it's more like they're trying to discover what the norm is. Because like you said, teenagers are great because they defy everything. It's like you start kind of figuring out, ooh, what I've been told is not necessarily the whole truth. Like there's more to this conversation. Okay, let me kind of like research, like let me go into it. How do you experience that in your, personal life?
Well, you've talked about rebellion, and I think that we all need a healthy dose of rebellion. There's enough going on in the world. There's enough effects of sin that there are things that we need to rebel against. It makes me think of I'm going to show my nerd a little bit, but it makes me think of Star Wars, where you've got the Rebel Alliance, right? Like, these are the heroes, but they are rebelling against this oppressive regime. And I think, unfortunately, oftentimes as we age and we just kind of get used to the status quo, we get used to the world, we stop fighting. We stop rebelling. And I think that there are still some things that are really worthy to be fought against, and there are things that are really worthy to rebel against. Now, knowing when to rebel is a total like complete necessity, because sometimes you'll see teenagers who are just rebelling for the sake of rebelling. Like, I need to do something, or I need to find myself. But there's the spirit of, no, something is wrong. If something is wrong, I can't stand for this, or I'm going to circumvent it somehow, or I'm going to test the boundaries. I'm going to see what I can get away with. And I think at the heart of that, there's something that makes God smile, of knowing that we are pushing forward to be living life to the fullest, honestly. And sometimes I think that means a little healthy dose of rebellion.
When you say a healthy dose of rebellion, all I can think of is like, how the wisdom that previous generations can give us to start, like, enacting change. Because being young also means that you're kind of inexperienced. I mean, that's just the reality, like, young people are usually not married. Young people are usually they don't have a lot of experience in the workforce. They don't have life experiences, or they have traveled less. Some of you maybe out there have been very privileged, like, to have traveled from different countries, or learning languages, or kind of like have some professional development at an early age. But, most of what it is considered young, like, let's say 25 less, like, you're still in school. You still haven't seen everything around, like, and I remember my mom is always like, saying like, oh, I've been around there twice, like, and it kind of just reminds me like, oh yeah, you know what, like, what you're talking about, because you've been there. But she doesn't have, okay, I'm not saying my mom is really young, so, I'm not trying to, if she's listening to this, like, I'm not trying to say you're old.
Hi, Jose's mom, you're not old.
But pretty much what I'm trying to say is, my mother is not as young as I am, and I do have the energy to kind of like keep going and kind of like learning from her experience, so like, I think the healthy dose of rebellion, because I mean, okay, kind of going into the Star Wars analogy, but not going too deep. It's like, when you think of the team that is like, organizing the rebellion, right? You have Luke Skywalker, which is like the hero or whatever, like, he's really young. And then you have who is at the top of the rebellion, right? Who is the master? Who is the one that's teaching him how to rebel, what to choose, or, kind of like be wise in what you're saying. Like, you have Yoda training him, like, stuff like that.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, man. He's the first one. He pulls Luke alongside him, and he's guiding him from the start. So again, to call back to some previous podcasts, mentorship, man, it's so important. We need to be there harnessing the power of these young people. Right.
And again, yeah, that's my point. It's like, when you kind of combine these two things, I think the culture just gets better. And like, I think what the people that are older and wiser, because you acquire wisdom as you go through life, is what they need to do. And like, what I think we need to do also, like, we're not getting to that age yet, but, we have been around, like, I mean, a couple of years of education, a couple of years of experience here. And I can already see, like, okay, you have a great idea, but we need to channel it. I mean, I'm going to engage with you and let you do whatever you want, but at the same time, like, do not make this obvious mistake that you do not see. Like, it's like, I've been through that road, like, and like, please do not make the mistake. Like, you can do so much better, that kind of idea. I think it's very important when it comes to youth culture, because one thing that is not being done right now, I think, is listening. We talk about mentorship a lot, and we have that podcast on mentorship. We have the podcast on community engagement. We have different podcasts that have been hinting towards community development and like the necessity of that community. But sometimes what ends up happening is you have the old guard, right, that has all of the wisdom. They don't pass it to the youngsters that need it. And then the youngsters start making the mistakes, and then the old guard starts critiquing the youngster, right? And it's kind of like a vicious cycle. And I think the way to kind of like counteract it is to listen, to just let the conversation happen, see what the concerns are, and then you kind of move into like the solution section of whatever issue that we're talking about.
Yeah, I really appreciate that approach and that perspective, Jose. I think oftentimes older generations I guess let's address this. How old are we talking here? Am I part of youth culture, Jose? Am I
think
an
you
adult?
are, yeah.
Okay. So that's a question as well. When does one actually become an adult?
Well, I think that's a very important question that you now say, because there is a movement, I think, in Christianity right now, and even in society, that is trying to eradicate the movement towards adulthood. You know, if you look at what culture or like advertisements or what it's appealing right now, the things that are appealing are mainly, you know, focused towards youth. And they're trying to bring the adults, right, to have this youthful mindset. And, you know, the appeal is just for people to kind of not mature on time. You know, like there's a process of maturity. There's a point. I mean, it's good to not be young, you know, and that's a message that is not being delivered to young people today. It's like, you got to stay hip, or you got to stay like, you know, cool, whatever it is, right? Or whatever term we're going to come up in the future, like bet, or, you know, like I think that's a term right now. Like I don't use it. So from time to time I've used it, but like, you know, it's like, it's this appeal of like, stay young. Even within our church, right? Even within who we are today, like we have the movement of growing young, like, you know, for churches to grow young.
Yeah.
I mean, is growing young what we have to do, or do we have to kind of seek the balance towards maturity? See, I think like what I'm trying to say is that youth culture cannot stay you cannot stay young forever. You have to mature. You have to go to, because there's nothing wrong with adulthood. I guess we will have to do a series on adulthood. what does it mean to adult?
Right.
You know, I think many students and professionals and like people are just afraid of adulting.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a whole meme list, right? Of like hashtag adulting, or like, I can't adult today. That's the thing.
Right. And I think that there has been discouragement, and your question is, you know, how do you consider yourself young? When do you cut that off? But it's like, there's nothing wrong with being quote unquote old, or just like aging. Like, you know, aging represents different stages in life. I mean, I don't want to be 15 for the rest of my life. There's a certain aspects of immaturity at that time that I had, and some that I'm still getting rid of today. But, you know, in my opinion, it's just like, I don't want to stay there. Like, you know, I want to keep progressing. But a lot of times it's like, you know, you have the whole shaming from both sides. Old people to young people, and young people to old people.
Oh yeah, it's true.
You know, you have shaming to old people. It's like, oh, he's old, he doesn't know anything. But it's like, no, you know, you also have good things in there. But also we have to be careful of not taking, like, you know, our youth away. Like, you know, because there is energy. There is a lot of achievements that have happened in your life, and like a lot of growth. So I think there has to be a balance. And I guess the question to, when do we consider ourselves old? I think maybe...
not old, but an adult. When are we an adult? Yeah.
I think you kind of transition, you know, from being young and being categorized in the youth culture department, probably around, I wouldn't even say it's time-based. I will say it's event-based. You know, like, I think things that mature you faster is like marriage or a child.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like those things definitely change your life for, you know, for good, for good, because they teach you different aspects of who you are. So I will kind of like go away from the timeline based, because that says, oh, once you reach this time, then you're an adult. You do not belong youth. I think it's more dealing with maturity.
That's fair. Now, Jose, I had a couple thoughts that came to my mind. First, you mentioned growing young as a movement for the church. What do you mean by that? So
growing young is kind of like a movement mainly based in the West Coast, as far as I understand. You know, Caitlin is, yes, you know.
Yes.
Well, it's a good movement. I think growing young, like, you know, has some positives, which is like, you know, they analyze your church. They kind of like show whether it's a safe space for youth people or young people, not youth people, but if it's a safe space for young people to come, for everyone's voice to be listened to, and kind of like they go through different values and stuff like that. So, I mean, you can kind of like request for them to do kind of this analysis. They send you a survey and like, you know, all of that. And then you analyze it with your church and kind of like understand, you know, is my church a safe place for everyone? And the appeal to growing young, I think, is generational. It's just because, well, in our church, we have a youth exodus, you know, so I think right now the main aspect that is being emphasized is, well, hey, let's grow young. Like, let's go back to our roots, because that's where we started. Like, as Adventists, we started with what? Young people, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds making a very big difference. And now we don't have those 18 to 21, 22, 23-year-olds, because you have the whole chicken and egg professional. It's like, you don't have experience, and, you don't have a job because you don't have, that whole idea. But yes, that's what essentially growing young is. It's like a system, service, whatever you want to call it, within our church that kind of analyzes our churches and provides some guidelines to improve your church so that it can grow younger than it is right now.
Mm-hmm. And I love what you're talking about, how, back in the day, it was the youth that were really leading the church, the young people that were. And I appreciate what you were talking about earlier of mentors coming alongside, because I think oftentimes youth gets a bad rap. The inexperience trumps everything else that they have to offer. And we think, oh, well, we're going to do these things for them. We'll put these programs on for them. Or we are not going to let them into leadership because they don't have the experience. They don't know what they're doing. But there is so much energy to be harnessed. There is so much, there's a lot of intellect. There's so much intelligence in our youth that is not being tapped into, because we're saying, are we looking down on them for being young? Let's pull out a good old Timothy. We've got such a phenomenal generation that we can be harnessing for good. I think we have to be coming alongside and mentoring and giving them an opportunity to actually make significant changes in our church. That's why I'm so stoked about things like the Growing Young movement, because it's saying, hey, we have an issue. We want to make a change. How can we best do that? As you mentioned, a lot of it has to do with listening. A lot of it has to do with just sitting down and saying, what do you see? What do you have to offer? What thoughts do you have that you can contribute? And how can we make that a positive reality? That the Bible is filled with youth doing amazing things. I would say, like, vast majority of the Bible characters we read.
I mean, you think even of the disciples, like, they were mainly young people, like, by our standards, I guess. Or, I mean, you think the Old Testament, like, Moses was young, right? I guess they lived longer around that time, so maybe they were older for us and younger for them. But regardless, like, most of the people that are kind of like taking command, leadership, they're young people. I mean, you have Joshua, right? He was young. You have David. You have even Samuel, like right there, like very connected, like, Solomon as well, very young king, Josiah, like, I mean, all of these kings, like, they kind of came young into the picture. So, and young men and women too, like, you have some of the characters that are exalted as well. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a woman right now.
Mary, like, prime
yeah,
example.
Sure.
Yeah,
yes. You are more than correct. How can I forget her? Very, very important. She brought our Savior. But yeah, I mean, you have decent examples, or the daughters of Philip. In the book of Acts, like, they prophesy, and, like, they receive these utterances, right? And they're young, like, they're very young. And again, Timothy, you mentioned, but yeah, I think we need to do a great deal of growing young in our church, but also growing mature, because it's like, if you stay young, there's certain aspects that will not progress, as a whole.
And in the same way that we talk about maturing in the faith, there's just holistic maturity as well. And so in the same token as harnessing the youth power, how can we also walk beside them and grow them in their maturity? How can we assist them in the maturing process? Yeah,
I think that all of those are great questions, I think, to ponder and kind of like apply in our churches, because it's hard. It's not easy. I think it takes time, it takes effort, it takes intentionality. In one of the podcasts that we're going to be releasing, I talk with Caleb Isley from Humans of Adventism, and something that he's doing a lot is like kind of like bridging that gap, because he features stories from all generations. And I think that's great, because, I mean, in reality, when we show the faces of the Humans of Adventism, it's not just young people, it's not just old people, but the representation is like all across the board. And kind of like a hot topic right now, I guess, it's like, the whole representation system from the GC from the NAD. Like, I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's like, yeah, we're not representing the young people out there, their voices. Like, they need to learn. We need to learn, how this system works, why it works, and like, how can I become involved? And I think a lot of people want to do that. It's just that we're kind of skeptical because it's like, you don't have the experience to lead spiritually. And I'm like, but do you? I mean, yeah, like, let's ask that question back. Like, do you have the experience to lead spiritually?
And where did that experience come from? All of us who are in ministry, all of us who are in places of authority, we had to start somewhere. And more likely than not, we had some people that gave us opportunities and gave us chances and came alongside us and assisted us in the process of our maturity to be where we're at today.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. It's because, when you're given a chance to shine, like, to put your opinion out there, I think that's when you start realizing, you know what, my opinion matters. And I actually want to be represented. I actually have something to say in this space, in this arena, in this conversation. So I think that that's what we have to look for. And, maybe it's creating different avenues. For those of you who are listening, like, if you have something to say, just reach out to us. We are more than willing to put you out there. I mean, that's why we created this space, to create conversation, to show to the world that, hey, your voice matters. Because I think something that we tell to youth a lot is like, yes, your voice matters, but when? I think that's a question that I like to ask. When does it matter? Does it matter when I have done all of these great things for the church? Or does it matter now when I actually need the experience to go out there and to preach the gospel or to help the poor, and different things. And I think we also have different standards when it comes to youth culture, like, or like the youth as a whole. What can we do to bridge that gap? I think that's the question that we need to be asking more and more as we go.
Well, you mentioned Humans of Adventism, and even the fact that we're doing this podcast right now, we have people of our church who are playing into youth culture, who are tapping in. Podcasts, that's a young adult thing. That's a youth thing. Utilizing Instagram, that is huge. All of these ways that people are operating to try to connect within youth culture, to make Adventism relevant, to make it applicable where you're at. That's fantastic. So I'm really excited to see movements like these of trying to take what is already naturally occurring within general population youth culture and seeing how we can infuse Christianity into that, seeing how we can infuse Adventism into that.
I think two other areas that I can think of when it comes to this idea of like youth culture and what's tapping into what's already happening in the space of young people is music and art. Like for a long time, we in the Seventh-day Adventist Church have kind of neglected that, like, because artistic representations are huge. Like, I mean, I can think of whoever made that picture of Jesus knocking on the door, the one that's like on Steps to Christ and like so many other books. Like, I mean, that's art. That's art representing Jesus, or like religious things. But also, like, I think something that we have shunned out is anything that does not deal with Jesus per se. And we kind of forget that those things are in the Bible. Like when you think of the book Song of Solomon, for example, you have a very poetic, very real poem or very real book about love. That is an artistic expression, at its finest. Or the Psalms, when you look through the Psalms, you can see many good things, but many real experiences, right? And I think that in the church, sometimes we kind of color code like red and just danger for danger, right? It's like, you know what? That's just a topic that we don't want to address right now. And I think as a young person, I feel like, no, like, let's talk about it. Let's talk intelligently about it. I'm not going to just bring all of it, like, my emotions and like my rage, which is part of the conversation. I'm not trying to deny them, but it's like, but I also have something to say about this. Like, and maybe it is your rage. Maybe it is your, discomfort with the conversation and how it has been handled. Because yes, it's like the whole modern, postmodern kind of division that we have had for like a long time. That is like, what do you prioritize? Data, emotions. Like, why not both? Like, bring them both into the conversation and see what happens. Maybe something positive.
Yeah. I mean, both are things that have been instilled in us by God. Emotions are not a terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, they're perfect, and I think, again, coming back to this, like, music and art, like, that we talk about, it's like, sometimes we shun out, like, any music that does not say Jesus, or that does not have, God, or like, that is, quote unquote worldly style of music or whatever you want to call it, you know. But the reality is that they're all expressions of creativity. And, you know, why, you know, if you're so concerned, let's say that you're concerned about your style or music choice preference or the preference that your kids are taking, or like, you know, why don't you actually talk to them, you know, and like make them see your point, and maybe they will change. And if not, well, you know, they have the autonomy to make a mistake. And I think that's another part. And I think one of the last parts that we kind of are going to discuss today is just that when you're young, you make mistakes. That's just the reality. You know, like you're going to make mistakes the same way adults make mistakes, but maybe they are more, I guess, accountable to those mistakes because they have gone through that road already, you know, but when you're young, you're just learning. You know, there's nothing wrong about making a mistake as long as you learn from it, you know, and you need to have a conversation about like, what does this mean? What does this mistake, like, how can I make it better? You know, like, how can I change and produce like a better me, you know, like come out better through study, through conversation, through whatever it is, you know?
Most of the best learning experiences come about because of a failure. That is where we learn. That is how we grow. And so if we want to give youth an opportunity to succeed, I think that also means we have to give them an opportunity to fail too, and be completely fine with that. And in fact, be excited about when they do fail, because that gives them even more opportunity to succeed greater in the future.
Failure is part of the process. And I think, you know, we kind of have to re-envision failure. Like, you know, sometimes we correlate failure with a moral mistake or a sin, you know? And I think they're not actual, you know, things. Like sometimes things fail just because they fail. And like you have to kind of realize, like, why did this fail? Was it because of sin? Sure, sometimes. Like, you know, maybe selfishness.
Or did I just need to edit that poem a bit more before I shared it for everyone?
Yes, exactly. Like, you know, I just said something wrong, quote unquote. You know, whatever it is, like at the end of the day, like we have to remember that it is our experiences, and it is like, you know, through reasoning, you know, come let us reason, like, you know, kind of like that. What God says to us, like, you know, let us reason, like, you know, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what happened. Let me give you some mentoring. Let me give you, like, no, we talk about all of these important matters, but it's just a matter of like sitting down, having a conversation, and, you know, pushing forward.
Yeah.
Well, I think that will be it for today. We have kind of touched upon the topic of youth culture, but we're going to have some exciting interviews coming up. I'm really excited about what's coming for you guys. I think you guys will enjoy it a lot. Any final comments, Caitlin, that you have on the topic?
I think in general, as a church, we have a great amount of fear towards youth culture. And that's been the case for decades. We're afraid of, what's that music they're listening to? What are those movies they're watching? I think we need to step back from our fears a bit and step into lives more. Step into the lives of our youth and say, how can I best engage with you and empower you and allow you to be a significant part of our church? And oftentimes that means engaging in youth culture in a way that you might not even have expected, whether that's hopping on Instagram, or I think Facebook's probably for older people nowadays. I don't even know anymore. You know, just really getting to know the ins and outs of what is important to youth. Spending that time listening and allowing for growth within yourself and within them throughout the whole process.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds awesome. Well, thanks for listening today. We really appreciate your time listening to the topic of youth culture. Please look out for the coming up interviews. There's some, you know, really, really powerful stuff out there that we're going to be sharing with you guys. This will be our last series of the year.
What?
Actually, we'll have a special end of the year episode for you guys, kind of like reflecting on the journey of this year, like, you know, and, you know, some exciting stuff for next year that we're just ready to publish, honestly. Yeah. But, you know, twice a week, that's our schedule so far. But thanks a bunch, everyone, for listening and for contributing, for sharing. You know, that really helps. If you haven't reviewed us on iTunes, please do so. It really helps us to get out there to, you know, reach other audiences, Christian, Adventists, and also like some non-Adventists. Like, you know, we've been getting some nice feedback, from people that are, non-Adventists, from people that are not even religious. They listen because it's maybe like a topic that is very general, that doesn't like go into like, Adventism as a whole. And that's just a way, to create conversation. And that's what we're here for. If you want to support us financially, you know where to find us. Patreon.com/Disruptive Adventism. We start at $1. And for those of you who are listening that haven't signed up, right now we're running a promotion. If you sign up, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's $1, $1 a month, whatever it is that you sign up for, we're going to send you a shirt, a hoodie, a crew neck, t-shirt, or a long sleeve. So it's kind of like festive. We're festive right now. So if you sign up, even if it's $1, we'll send you a shirt. So, hey, you have nothing to lose.
That's right. End of the year deal. This won't last long, so you gotta get in on it.
That's right. Well, thank you very much for listening. This has been it for today, and as always, we invite you to be disruptive.